The reason I found it at all is because nobody in that room cared what those boxes were. I was working a contract job for a records vendor in Plainfield, outside Indianapolis, scanning old insurance files into a system the parent company could search without paying people like me anymore. It was the kind of work you take when you need something quiet and predictable, and you don't have the luxury of being proud. At that point, I was 38, 2 years out from my divorce, and trying very hard to look like a man no one would hesitate to trust with a 7-year-old every other weekend. That sounds more dramatic than I mean it. Claire never tried to keep my daughter from me. She just wanted me consistent, which is a fair thing to want from someone who spent most of his 20s saying yes to things and forgetting them later. I wasn't drinking anymore. I had a decent apartment in Avon. I picked Sadie up on Fridays, dropped her off at school Mondays when it was my turn, paid what I was supposed to pay. The job was ugly and cold and full of paper dust, but it was a job with a badge and a schedule and a reason to leave the apartment at 6:30 in the morning. The boxes mostly held what you'd expect: roof damage, slip and falls, mold claims where everybody sounded tired by page 3, commercial fire losses with black and white photos stapled to estimates. You'd cut the banker box open, check the intake sheet, pull staples, scan, fix jams, rename files, repack what legal said to repack, and shred what legal said to shred. There were 4 of us in that back room, 2 temps, me, and Janice, who wasn't technically our supervisor, but had been in records longer than any actual supervisor had been alive. She taught me which boxes were going to smell like cigarettes, which ones would have Polaroids stuck together, and which claim numbers meant some lawyer somewhere was still billing against them. The box I found was in a stack that didn't belong with the rest of that run. We were doing closed commercial auto. This one had a faded red stripe across the top and an old adhesive label that said, "Cat relocation. Do not split." No file number on the outside, just a handwritten date. January 27th, 2002. I almost pushed it aside for Janice to look at, but then I saw the property name written on the short end in black marker. Cedar Ridge Apartments, Building C. I stood there longer than I should have, not because Cedar Ridge was some famous place. It was a nothing apartment complex in Muncie, the kind of low-brick setup that got renamed every 6 years when management changed. But I knew that name. I had lived there with my mother and my little sister until the summer before 5th grade. You remember addresses you had to memorize as a kid. You remember the shape of the parking lot. You remember which building had the Coke machine and which stair rail had the loose bolt your mother always warned you about. Cedar Ridge had a basement laundry room in Building C and a hill in back where the snow turned gray after 2 days because the plows pushed road slush up against it. I checked the date again. January 27th, 2002. I was 14 that winter. Rachel was 9. I remember that winter because we spent one Sunday at a motel near the highway and thought it was fun. My mother said one of the pipes in our building had burst, and they needed people out for a night, maybe 2. I remember indoor pool chlorine and stale waffle batter at the free breakfast. I remember Rachel jumping on the beds in her socks while my mother tried to keep her off the comforter because they charge you for everything in these places. I did not remember a catastrophe relocation file. I cut the tape and opened the box. The top layer was motel paperwork, rooming lists, meal vouchers, reimbursement forms. Not one family. 53 units. I actually counted because I thought I'd read it wrong. 53 units temporarily relocated to the Fairfield Inn off Anya and 69. 2 nights authorized, possibly 3. The packet underneath had resident intake sheets with apartment numbers, head of household names, counts of adults and minors, medication notes, pet notes, and one column labeled immediate medical concern. This wasn't a burst pipe in one apartment. This was a building event. Maybe the whole complex. I kept going and found an expense summary. Buses, bottled water, portable blankets, janitorial remediation, emergency restoration, air testing, temporary security, incident communications. There was a typed cover memo clipped to the front of a stack, but half the first page had been torn off. The remaining paragraph said, in that bloodless insurance language that always made real things sound fake, that due to overnight occupancy interruption involving Building C and adjacent residents, relocation procedures had been initiated to reduce exposure, avoid resident unrest, and maintain claim stability. Avoid resident unrest. That phrase bothered me more than it should have. I started flipping through intake sheets looking for a familiar name, telling myself I probably wouldn't find one because there had to be more than one Cedar Ridge in Indiana. Then I found my mother, Denise Keene, Unit C-14. 2 adults, 2 minors. That was already wrong. There were never 2 adults in our apartment. My dad had been gone for years. My mother never had anybody move in with us. Under medical notes it said, younger female inhaler used at scene. Older male screened, no transport. Next page, attached with a rusted paperclip, was a photocopy of my mother's Indiana driver's license. Same face, same address, same apartment. I remember sitting down because my knees did something strange, not collapsing exactly, just that quick, empty drop you get if you miss a stair in the dark. One of the other temps asked if I was okay, and I said I had stood up too fast, which wasn't even close to believable because I'd been standing the whole time. At the bottom of my mother's intake sheet was a signature line. She had signed it. I knew her signature. She made a capital D, like 2 humps instead of 1. The timestamp in the corner said 3:18. There were more pages. A resident briefing checklist, a release authorization, a damage disposition notice. None of them used words like fire or leak or explosion. They kept saying occupancy interruption and temporary relocation event and environmental discomfort. The more careful the language got, the worse it felt. Then I found the thing that stayed with me after everything else. It was a triage wristband sealed in a little evidence envelope and taped to a form titled Minor Screening Supplement. Somebody had written in blue pen, keepsake/ID do not discard. The wristband was white plastic, the cheap kind that snaps once. Printed on it in all caps was my name, Daniel Keene. A second line, smaller, C-14, and below that, a time, 2:11. I can still see the way the ink from the form behind it ghosted through the plastic sleeve. It looked official in a way childhood memories never do. I had a wristband from an emergency I did not remember being in. Janice came up beside me so quietly, I didn't hear her. "You're pale," she said. "What'd you get into?" I showed her the label on the box and the intake sheet with my mother's name. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because if another person looked at it and said it was normal, I could stop feeling what I was feeling. Janice read just enough to understand this wasn't a routine misfile. "That should have been segregated," she said. "Segregated from what?" She shrugged in that tired way people do when they know more about process than they want to explain. "Legacy catastrophe stuff. Special handling. Probably came over wrong in the acquisition. This says 53 units. Then it wasn't pipes." "No." She leaned down closer, reading the resident count. Then she looked at the box again. "If it's personal, you can ask Todd whether he wants you off it." I said, "I lived there." She gave me a quick sideways look, the kind grown-ups give kids when they realize they've said the wrong thing in front of them, even though I was almost 40. "That'd be why they segregate," she said. "What happened there?" "If it's not in the front packet, I don't know." She said it too quickly. "Janice, I mean it. We used to get boxes from carriers all the time that were coded weird because legal wanted things called one thing, and operations called them something else. Don't read into every word." That should have helped. It didn't. I asked Todd if there was an incident summary on file. He was 32, wore quarter zips in every season, and treated all confusion like a scheduling problem. He took the intake sheet from me, scanned the name, scanned the date, then looked at the box and said, "Don't process this yet." "That's what this is," I said. "Processing." "I know. Just leave it on my desk. I'll check with Andrea." "Who's Andrea?" "Claims liaison." "Can I at least get the incident description?" He already had the box in his hands. "Let me figure out why it's here." That was at 11:15. By lunch, the box was gone. I checked Todd's office. I checked the hold shelf where we put privileged files. I checked the cart by the shred bins. Nothing. When I asked Todd, he said Andrea had requested it back pending review. Back where? Secure storage. Why? He gave me a look that mixed sympathy and annoyance, which is a hard combination to do unless you work in corporate offices a long time. Because it has resident information and it's tied to a legacy event. It's tied to me. That's exactly why I need you to let me handle it. There are moments where, if you're honest, you know you still have the option of letting something go. I probably had one there. If I had gone back to the scanner and spent the rest of the afternoon on totaled fleet vehicles from Fort Wayne, I would still have had a job 2 months later. I would probably sleep better now. Instead, I spent my lunch break in my car, searching every combination of Cedar Ridge Apartments, Muncie, January 2002, fire, leak, evacuation, hotel, and nothing came up. Not nothing exactly. Apartment listings, old tax sales, a crime map from 2016. But no article about a mass relocation, no archived TV hit, no city press release. For 53 households to be moved overnight, there should have been something. Even in 2002, local news loved apartment footage. People in coats holding laundry baskets on sidewalks. That kind of thing practically edited itself. I called my sister. Rachel teaches 3rd grade in Carmel and has a way of answering the phone like she's already disappointed in you. Not because she's mean, because I'm her older brother, and I spent enough years being unreliable that some part of her still expects a weird ask. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, I'm at work. Quick question." That never means quick. "Do you remember Cedar Ridge, when we stayed at that motel?" A pause. "Sort of." "What do you remember?" "Which time?" That caught me. There was more than one? I don't know. Maybe I'm mixing places up. Why? At work, I found paperwork from back then. It looked like more than a pipe burst. What kind of paperwork? Insurance stuff, relocation lists, intake forms. Daniel. She always says my name when she thinks I'm about to become a problem. I'm serious. I'm not saying you're not serious. I'm saying maybe don't make yourself nuts over some old file box. Do you remember being screened by EMTs? No. Using your inhaler? I used my inhaler all the time back then. This would have been in the middle of the night. Another pause. Then, Mom said the boiler went out and there was water downstairs. Not pipes. I don't know. Maybe both. Do you remember a wristband? No. Do you remember buses? No. I remember the motel. Rachel from school thought it was cool because I got to miss 2 days. That's literally what I remember. Did Mom ever talk about it later? Not really. Why not? She didn't talk about most things later. That was true enough that I couldn't argue with it. Before hanging up, Rachel said, "If this is one of those things where you stop sleeping and then convince yourself you uncovered a conspiracy, please don't." I didn't say conspiracy. You didn't have to. I picked Sadie up that Friday and told myself I would stop. That was my real attempt, if I'm being fair. I took her to the library, made boxed mac and cheese because she liked the shapes better than the regular kind, watched half of a movie where animated animals sing pop songs. I helped her with a puzzle on the rug and only checked my phone twice. When Claire texted to ask whether Sadie had taken her allergy medicine, I answered right away, which was the kind of small behavior I had trained myself to treat as important. Then, after Sadie went to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and paid $30 to search a newspaper archive that went back farther than Google. Nothing. No Cedar Ridge evacuation. No resident displacement. No overnight incident. No motel fire victims. I widened it to the whole week around January 27th. There was a school board fight, a teenager arrested for breaking into vending machines, a snowstorm 2 counties west, and a church chili supper photo where all the faces looked subtly exhausted, the way faces did back then in local papers. Nothing about Cedar Ridge. I searched the property owner. I found that in 2002, the complex had been owned by a company called Harrow Property Group, which no longer existed. A state business filing listed a registered agent. The office address now belonged to a dentist. I searched court records. There had been a premises suit against Harrow in 2004 involving a stair injury. No mass tort, no wrongful death, no tenant class action, nothing that matched 53 units, sleeping at a Fairfield Inn. I don't know what I expected the internet to do for me. Deliver an answer cleanly enough that I could go to bed. What it did instead was make the absence feel intentional. On Monday, I asked Todd if Andrea had found anything. He said, "She asked whether you removed any documents from the box." I laughed because the question was so backwards, it felt almost incompetent. "No. She just needs to know." "No, she doesn't. She needs to tell me what happened there." He lowered his voice. "Daniel, I'm trying to keep this simple. The file was misrouted. It contains resident medical references and minors. Legal wants it handled by the claims transition team." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have." "Was there an incident or not?" He hesitated. It was small, but I saw it. "There was a temporary relocation." "For what?" "I don't know." "That's not true." His face changed then, not angry, just closed. "Don't put me in that position." That phrase stayed with me too, not "don't keep digging," not "I'm telling you there's nothing here." Don't put me in that position. That afternoon, my badge stopped opening the side archive room. I wish I could tell you I knew, right then, what that meant. I didn't. I told myself access gets adjusted all the time. Somebody probably cleaned up permissions. But when I asked Janice whether hers still worked, she badged in on the first try, gave me a quick look and said, "That's not random. Did they say anything to you?" "No." "Do you know Andrea?" "Just emails, old claims side. Mostly there to make sure nobody says the wrong thing about old liabilities." "The wrong thing to who?" Janice started feeding paper into the industrial shred bin. You ever notice how every office tells you transparency matters right up until something expensive happened before you got there? I said, "So you do know something." I know how people act when they want a file to stop existing. I drove to Muncie after work the next day. Cedar Ridge wasn't called Cedar Ridge anymore. The sign out front said Red Maple Commons in brushed metal letters that looked too expensive for the buildings behind it. Same bones, though. Same long 3-story brick rectangles. Same slope in back. The hill where the snow turned gray was still there, only cut flatter. The leasing office had moved into what used to be the old laundry building near the entrance. I remembered that because my mother once sent me there with $8 in quarters, and I lost half of them in the slush. The woman in the office looked about 23 and entirely manufactured out of beige. Beige sweater, beige nails, beige smile that turned on when the door opened, and off the second I said I used to live there. "I'm just wondering," I said, "did Building C used to have a basement community room?" Her smile came back in the weaker customer service version. "Not that I'm aware of. There was definitely a laundry room downstairs. We have common laundry in every building now. Back then, there wasn't. I really couldn't tell you." "Do you have old floor plans?" She laughed lightly like I'd made a cute request. "No, nothing like that." "Could I talk to maintenance?" "For old floor plans?" "For the basement." The smile thinned. "There isn't a basement." I looked at her for a second too long. "I lived there." "I'm just telling you what our current plans reflect." That wording hit me immediately. Current plans reflect. Not there wasn't. Not you're mistaken. "Who owned the property before this?" "I have no idea." "Does anyone here? I can take your number." I gave it to her, though I knew I wouldn't hear back. Before I left, I asked to use the restroom, and while she pointed me down the hall, I took 2 quick photos of the fire evacuation map posted by the copier. It showed all current egress points for buildings A through F. Building C did not have a basement. In the parking lot, I pulled up the picture from the motel packet I'd snapped on my phone before Todd took the box. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, just reflex. But when I zoomed in, attached behind one of the rooming lists, there had been a partial site diagram from 2002. On it, Building C had a stairwell marked Lower Common/Laundry. I was still sitting there comparing the 2 maps when someone knocked on my passenger window. It was an older man in work pants with a ring of keys on his belt. Maintenance, or at least maintenance adjacent. I rolled the window down. "You here for a unit?" he asked. "No, used to live here." He looked past me at the buildings. "Long time ago. Early 2000s. He nodded once. "Different place then." "Did Building C have a basement?" His eyes moved to my phone in my hand. Not suspicious exactly. More like he had instantly recalculated what kind of conversation this was. "I'm not the guy to ask," he said. "So, there was one." I didn't say that. He tapped the roof of my car once, almost friendly, and walked off before I could say anything else. I started tracking down old tenants after that, which sounds obsessive because it was. But it also didn't feel crazy at the time. It felt like the next practical step. The intake sheet had names. A lot of them would have moved, sure, but older residents often stayed on the same phone number longer than anybody should. The third person I reached was a woman named Evelyn Brooks. I told her my name, and there was a pause long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, "Denise Keene's boy?" I hadn't heard anybody call me that in years. "Yeah? I remember your mother." I said I was trying to understand an incident from January 2002. She didn't say what incident. She said, "Who told you to call me?" "No one. I found paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" "Relocation records." A longer pause. Then, "You should not say that on the phone." There was no dramatic tone to it. That's part of why it worked on me. She sounded inconvenienced, not frightened, like I had brought up a family matter in the produce aisle. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said. "Well, that's what trouble usually says." I almost laughed, but she didn't. "Do you remember what happened?" I asked. I remember enough to mind my business. "Was it a fire?" "No." "Gas? You calling from work?" "What?" "Because if you're calling from work, I'm hanging up." I'm in my car. She let another second pass. There was a smell. What kind of smell? Metal. Hot water. Like when the iron sits too long on a shirt, but also sweet. You know? I didn't, but I said, okay. They kept telling us it was temporary. Everything was temporary that night. Sit here temporarily. Wait downstairs temporarily. Don't go back up temporarily. Then by morning, everybody had a folder and a motel room and a very strong opinion about not using the word evacuation. That word landed harder than anything so far. Who told you not to use it? Management first, then a man from the county or the city, I don't know which. Shirt and tie at 6 in the morning. Hair like a TV dentist. Did reporters come? Not while I was there. Why would they tell people that if it was just a burst pipe? She gave this soft, humorless sound. Baby, if it was just a burst pipe, why would your mother sign papers? I asked if we could meet. She said no twice, then asked where I lived now, then said there was a Bob Evans off McGalliard, where she met friends on Thursdays. 10 o'clock, she said. If you're weird, I'm leaving. Evelyn was smaller than I expected, and sharper in every way. Sharp chin, sharp glasses, sharp way of looking at me like she was checking whether I resembled anyone dishonest. She brought her own tea bag in her purse and asked for hot water, which for some reason made me trust her more. I'm only here, she said, because I liked your mother, even when she was tired enough to be mean. That sounds like her. It should. I asked what she remembered. She started practical and got less practical the longer she talked, which felt true to me in a way polished stories don't. There had been an ice storm the week before, not the kind that shuts down the state, just enough freezing rain and power flicker to keep everybody tense. Building C had ongoing boiler issues. People complained about heat on and off. On that Sunday night, around 9:30 or 10, residents started smelling something in the hallways. Not smoke exactly. Hot, sweet, metallic. One woman thought it was wiring. Another thought sewage. A maintenance man kept saying the lines had air in them and to stop opening windows because that made the heating problem worse. Around 11, Evelyn said, they started knocking doors, told some of us to wait in the lower room because they needed upstairs access. The basement? She gave me a look. You know there was a basement. I know there was laundry. There was laundry and storage and a room they called common space when inspections came around. How many people? In the room? I don't know. Enough that folding chairs ran out. Why would people go? She stirred sweet and low into her tea and said, because when you rent sheep from people who hold it over you, you get used to instructions that don't make sense. That line has stuck with me more than some of the scarier parts. She said kids were sleepy, adults irritated, everybody in coats. The room had a TV on with the sound low. Somebody from management brought down bottled water and told residents not to use the restroom because maintenance was working on a backup issue. After maybe half an hour, people started complaining of headaches, then nausea. Then one of the older men slid sideways in his chair and didn't answer when his wife tried to shake him. That was when it turned, Evelyn said. Until then, everybody was mad. Then, everybody got quiet. Did someone call 911? I thought I heard one of the women say she already had, but the assistant manager told her to hang up because emergency response was en route. Emergency response for what? Evelyn looked at me and shrugged. That changed every 10 minutes. She remembered buses. She remembered being told to leave larger bags behind. She remembered a child throwing up near the stairs and an EMT stepping over it because he was carrying a tank. She remembered being told, more than once, that residents from Building C would be housed temporarily, due to utility instability and water damage concerns. Water damage, I said. That's the phrase I remember. Was there water? Not where I was. Was there fire? No. So what hurt people? She pinched the bridge of her nose like the question itself was tiring. I don't know what they called it after. I know what it felt like in that room. It felt heavy, like you couldn't get a real breath no matter how many you took. Did anybody die? That made her eyes lift straight to mine. Not there. What does that mean? It means if you want to know the part after the motel, ask somebody who got paid more than I did. She told me one more thing before we left. In the motel conference room the next morning, while residents waited for forms, there had been a little girl at one of the back tables with a yellow sweatshirt tied around her waist. Evelyn assumed she was from one of the families in Building C, but when staff went through room assignments, they skipped right past her and the woman she was with. Not like they forgot. Like they had separate paperwork. I only remember that because your mother kept looking over there, Evelyn said. Not staring, just checking. Do you know who they were? No. Did you ever see them at Cedar Ridge before? Maybe. Hard to say. Kids were always in and out. Cousins, boyfriends' kids, babysitting, that kind of thing. She put a 10 on the table before I could stop her and said, "If somebody from your work calls, I don't know anything." That Friday, Andrea Pike finally emailed me. Not called. Emailed. It was a neat 3-paragraph message from a corporate address with a confidentiality footer that took up more space than the actual words. She said she understood I had encountered materials relating to a historical resident relocation event tied to property operations outside my assigned scope. She said, because those files could contain sensitive, personally identifiable information and medical references, all questions should be directed through transition counsel. She said the matter did not affect my employment, provided I complied with document handling protocols. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "We recognize your personal connection may make this feel unusual. Make this feel unusual." I wrote back and asked, in plain language, what the relocation event had been. She didn't answer that part. She asked whether I had taken any photographs of file contents. I stared at that email for a long time. At lunch, I drove to a strip mall shipping store, printed the photos I'd taken of the paperwork, and mailed copies to my apartment under no return address, like I was 12, and thought forwarding evidence to myself made me a criminal genius. It wasn't about being clever. It was about suddenly understanding that if I left those images on my phone or my work laptop, I might not have them later. The next useful thing happened because my mother kept everything. When she died in 2019, Rachel and I cleaned out a storage unit she'd maintained long after she had moved into a condos that could barely fit her furniture. My mother paid monthly to preserve old taxes, school art, Tupperware with no lids, and the kind of paperwork women keep when life has taught them that everything can be your fault if you can't produce a receipt. We split the boxes without much care. I ended up with 3 banker boxes in my apartment closet marked Kitchen/Denise/Misk. They had stayed there untouched because opening them felt like volunteering for a mood I didn't want. I opened them that weekend. Mostly junk, utility bills, a church cookbook, my 8th grade report card with a teacher, comment about selective effort, which still felt fair. Then, at the bottom of the second box, I found a plastic folder with motel stationery from the Fairfield Inn. Inside were 3 things: a room key sleeve with 214 written on it, a meal voucher for 4 continental breakfasts, and a folded piece of paper with typed bullet points under the heading, "Resident Information, Monday morning." It wasn't on official letterhead, just typed, copied, and cut a little crooked at the top. The bullet said things like, Please describe event as temporary relocation due to maintenance issue. Do not speculate regarding odors, ventilation, or outside causes. Questions about health concerns should be directed to on-site nurse. Do not speak with media. Re-entry schedule will be communicated by management only. The paper had my mother's handwriting on the back, a grocery list in blue ink, milk, cough syrup, Rachel inhaler refill, call school. I sat at my kitchen table holding that sheet for maybe 10 minutes. That was the first time I let myself think the thing plainly. Whatever happened there, they had coached the residents on what words to use. I went back to work Monday and acted normal enough that Todd relaxed. There's an advantage to being known as mildly difficult instead of explosive. People stop looking for the exact moment you're going to do something. At lunch, I asked Janice a different question. If a box like that existed, I said, where would the supporting media be? She didn't ask which box. Depends on the carrier. Photos usually separate. Audio, VHS, old DAT tapes if somebody was fancy. Why? Just curious. No, you're not. Hypothetically. She rolled her chair back and looked at me. Legacy media room, lower shelf, climate side. But your badge won't open it anymore. Does yours? She held my eye for a second, then looked back at her screen. Sometimes you can borrow a person's access without borrowing their badge. We waited until smoke break, when Todd and the temps went outside. Janice badged me into the media room and stood lookout in the hallway while I scanned shelves of gray plastic tubs labeled with claim blocks and years. The tub for CATRELRESIDENTSUPPORT 2002 was exactly where she said the carriers would put it if they didn't want things mixed with standard paper. Inside were 6 VHS tapes, 2 mini cassettes, photo envelopes, and a binder. I took the binder first because it was fastest. It held duplicate resident sheets, vendor authorizations, and a media log. One line made my throat go tight. Tape 3, FFN resident briefing / morning Q, and A/Pike Andrea Pike. Same last name as the woman emailing me now. I didn't know if it was the same person or a relative, but it meant the briefing had been recorded, and the recording had a label. I slipped tape 3 into my backpack, then hesitated, and took the photo envelope too. If Janice saw, she didn't say anything. At home that night, I dug an old VCR out of the hall closet, the one I'd kept for no reason except I hate throwing away electronics that still technically function. The picture rolled for a full minute before settling. The tape started with a hotel conference room at the Fairfield. Beige walls, stackable chairs, one of those standing easels with paper clipped over it. The camera angle was too high and too far back, probably set on a banquet counter. A timestamp in the corner read January 28th, 2002, 7:42. People looked exactly how people look after a night that made no sense. Rumpled, inward, trying to understand instructions, as if understanding them might retroactively make the night normal. Kids half asleep, older residents holding paper cups with both hands. Then a woman stepped to the front. It was Andrea Pike, or a younger version. Same jaw, same careful posture. She introduced herself as Resident Support Coordinator for Harrow Property Group and thanked everyone for their patience. Her voice was calm in the way hospital administrators' voices are calm, which isn't reassuring if you're already watching them closely. She said they were finalizing room extensions while building systems were stabilized. She said a nurse was available for persistent symptoms. She said residents would receive temporary meal assistance and replacement prescriptions as needed. And then she said this: for consistency, if you're contacted by employers, schools, or anyone outside management, please describe last night as a temporary relocation related to a maintenance event affecting utilities and water access in Building C. We don't want rumors creating unnecessary panic. Somebody off camera asked, "What about the smell?" Andrea smiled without liking the question. The building team is evaluating several possible contributors. Another voice, "My husband passed out. We have nursing staff available for anyone still not feeling well." That's not what I asked. Then the tape glitched. Static bands, sound wobble, a jump forward of maybe 20 seconds. When the image settled again, Andrea was saying, "No one is being asked to sign anything today that affects your rights." There was a tightness in the room even through the old VHS fuzz. People weren't yelling. They were doing something worse, which was trying to sound reasonable while realizing reason didn't matter. Then I saw my mother. She was sitting 3 rows back, hair pulled into the clip she wore when she didn't want to deal with it. Rachel leaned against her shoulder, blanket around both of them. I was at the end of the row, 14 years old and skinnier than I remembered, staring at the floor with a plastic wristband on my right arm. I paused the tape and got up from the couch, because suddenly I couldn't sit. There are photos of yourself as a kid that feel like someone else wearing your face. This was worse. This was motion. I watched that boy shift in the chair, rub his eyes, look over at the back corner of the room like he was checking whether someone was still there. I rewound and watched that part 3 times. Each time, just before I looked back down, my gaze went to the same place, the back table. A woman sat there with a paper cup and one hand over her mouth, like she was trying not to cough. Beside her was a girl about Rachel's age, maybe a little older, yellow sweatshirt tied around her waist exactly the way Evelyn had described. The girl was looking straight at the camera. I had absolutely no memory of her. When Andrea resumed talking, she thanked residents for cooperating overnight during the intake process. She reminded them that additional names should be provided quietly at the side table if those guests were not on your original lease paperwork. Guests. That was the word. I froze the frame on the back table and took a picture of my TV. The photo envelope from the tub had 30-some developed prints. Most were damage shots, exterior doors, laundry machines, hallway carpeting rolled back, a utility room with 2 portable heaters and a length of silver flexible duct lying unattached on the floor. One shot showed folding chairs scattered in a basement room I recognized instantly and hated recognizing. Green tile halfway up cinder block walls, bulletin board with curled flyers, vending machine in the corner. I hadn't known I remembered that room until I saw it. Another photo showed the stairwell landing outside it, with a handwritten sign taped to the railing, "Resident wait area this way." The worst photo was almost boring at first glance, just a close shot of a clipboard. But it was a sign-in sheet, and across the top, someone had written, "Lower room check children." Names, apartment numbers, times. Some lines were blank, some had initials. Next to mine, in cramped handwriting, was 0034, with DK. One line below mine, Mara O, guest, 0034. I sat there with that photo in my hand and tried to force a memory into existence by staring at the name. Nothing came. No face, no voice, just the yellow sweatshirt on the girl in the video and the knowledge that at some point, on a Sunday night in January, I had been checked into a basement waiting room with someone named Mara O. The next few weeks came apart in a very ordinary way. I was still going to work, still picking Sadie up, still answering emails. But the story under everything changed. Every free hour became either searching records or replaying pieces of that tape. I started hearing my mother's scripted phrases in memory, except I couldn't tell whether I was hearing real memory or just hearing them. Now, because I'd seen them on paper. Temporary relocation, maintenance event. Don't speculate. Claire noticed first. Not because I said anything. Because I missed Sadie's Tuesday dentist reminder even though it was on the fridge, then showed up late to school pickup on my Thursday dinner week because I had spent an extra 30 minutes outside the Delaware County building waiting for a records clerk who never came back from lunch. At my car, she said, "What's going on with you?" "Nothing." "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." "Daniel." People always use your name when they want to stop you from lying politely. I told her I'd found weird paperwork about my old apartment complex and was looking into it. I tried to make it sound minor, almost funny. Old insurance box, weird memory thing, probably nothing. The more I minimized it, the more it sounded unstable. Claire folded Sadie's puffer coat over her arm and said, "Is this the kind of thing where you need a few days to not have her?" I hated how quickly that question made me defensive. "No, why would you even ask that?" "Because I know you. That's not what this is." I didn't say it was. But she had, in the way people do when they're trying to give you the good version first. I said something sharp back. Not cruel, but sharp enough that Sadie looked up from the sidewalk crack she'd been tracing with her boot and went quiet. I apologized right away. Claire said it was fine in the exact tone that means it isn't. Then I drove home with Sadie in the back seat asking whether we were still getting pizza, and I realized I had spent so much time on a 20-year-old mystery that I had forgotten the one thing that actually mattered that night. That should have slowed me down, too. It didn't. I went to the county offices in person the next morning before work. Fire records sent me to emergency management, who sent me to property standards, who sent me back to fire records with a different form. Nobody acted sinister. That's important. If they had acted sinister, I might have trusted my own suspicion too much. Mostly they acted tired and procedural, and mildly irritated that I didn't already know which office owned which slice of old information. A fire prevention clerk finally found a paper index for 2002 incidents by address. Cedar Ridge had one entry that week. January 27th, 2002. Service call utility concern, Building C. No narrative, no run sheet attached, no injuries listed. "Can I get the report?" I asked. She checked the microfilm reference, frowned, checked again, then said, "It looks like the narrative wasn't retained here." "Why not?" "Sometimes, if the incident lead agency was EMS or county communications, we only kept the address index." "So, who has the narrative?" She clicked around an old-looking program on her monitor. "Possibly no one." "That can't be right." She gave me that same office look Todd had given me, where empathy and shutdown arrive together. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying that's what I have." I asked if there had been EMS dispatch. She said county communications might have CAD history if it wasn't purged in a system transition. County communications told me requests older than 10 years required a records petition. I filed one. 2 days later, I got an email saying no responsive CAD detail could be located beyond address/time metadata because of migration from a legacy platform in 2011. Address/time metadata. That was all. It listed 4 calls from Cedar Ridge Building C between 2217 and 0226. Nature codes, odor investigation, sick person, assist medical utility check. No more than that. No names. No notes. 4 calls in 4 hours to one apartment building in the middle of the night, with 53 units at a motel by morning, and still no public record of anything more serious than utility check. At work, Andrea Pike asked to meet. It wasn't a conference room meeting. It was worse. She came down to the scanning floor and asked pleasantly if we could talk in private. She said it like she was doing me a favor. Andrea Pike was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, One of those people who looked expensive without showing any obvious signs of money. Navy blazer, low heels, thin silver chain, haircut in a way that probably had a name. She smiled at Janice, shook Todd's hand, and treated me with the careful warmth people use when they're about to say something they want you to experience as reasonable. We went into a small conference room with fake frosted glass. She didn't sit right away. She set a legal pad on the table, folded her hands over it, and said, "I understand this has become personal for you." Become makes it sound recent. She accepted that without reacting. "All right, it is personal for you. What happened at Cedar Ridge?" "There was a resident relocation event." That phrase again. It's the accurate one. "No, it's the safe one." She watched me for a second, then sat. "I'm going to ask you something directly. Did you remove any media from the Legacy archive?" That was the first time I understood that they knew something was missing besides paper. "No." "You're sure?" "Yes." She nodded once like she was recording a box being checked in her head, not because she believed me. "The reason I'm here is not to debate language. It's to prevent you from damaging yourself over an incomplete set of materials." "Damaging myself how?" "By building a story out of fragments you do not have context for." "You mean the part where 53 apartments got moved in the middle of the night and nobody's willing to say why?" Her expression barely changed, but I saw the little tightening around the mouth. "I mean the part where memory, fear, legal process, and old property management failures get mixed together over time." "That's a lot of words to avoid telling me what happened." She leaned back, not threatened, just settling in. "There was a mechanical failure. There were reported symptoms. The property owner, county responders, and insurer made decisions in real time that were imperfect. That is true of most incidents." "Then why coach residents on what to say?" "Residents were asked not to speculate. That's not the same thing." "It often is." I said, "There was a girl at the motel on separate paperwork." That got me the first real reaction. Not shock. Recognition. Then irritation that she had let it show. "Who was she?" I asked. "I don't know who you mean." "That's not true either." She looked at the door, then back at me. "Daniel, I want you to hear this carefully. Some families at that property had circumstances they did not want documented. Occupancy issues, unofficial caregivers, children staying where they weren't supposed to be staying. People made choices that night based on safety and speed. Some of those choices also had legal consequences. Not all of them belonged to the company." I stared at her. That was the closest anyone had come to saying something real, and even then it was shaped to spread the blame around evenly. "So because some people had kids off lease," I said, "everybody got told to call it maintenance?" "I didn't say that." "No, you implied it, which is nicer." She stood, smoothing the front of her blazer. "I'm advising you, as plainly as I can, to stop trying to reconstruct this from partial records. It will not end with clarity." "It already didn't." She picked up her pad. "Then don't make it cost you more." I wish I had something impressive to say back. I just asked, "Did anyone die?" She held my eye a second too long. "Not on that property," she said. Then she left. Todd fired me the following Wednesday. Officially, it was unauthorized handling of restricted legacy materials and violation of chain of custody procedures. He said it in the tone of a person who had rehearsed being compassionate. There was a severance offer if I signed a confidentiality and non-disparagement packet, which told me more than his explanation did. I didn't sign. I asked whether Janice was in trouble. He said, "This isn't about Janice," which meant it partly was. When I got home, there was a padded envelope propped between my apartment door and the frame. No postage, no return address. Inside was a mini cassette and one sticky note in Janice's handwriting. This was headed for purge. No message, no warning, just that. I had to drive to a thrift store in Brownsburg to find a little recorder that would play the cassette. I sat in my car in the parking lot and listened the first time because I couldn't wait. The tape started in the middle of room noise, papers moving, somebody coughing. A man said, "Levels are fine. Go ahead whenever." Then a woman's voice, flat and professional. "This is the Delaware County Emergency Management Agency with an emergency message for residents on Muncie's west side. Due to a hazardous airborne release associated with a freight incident near the Tillotson corridor, residents in the Cedar Ridge, Barrington, and West Hollow areas are instructed to remain indoors and away from windows until further notice. If you are currently outside, return to the nearest building immediately. Do not travel into the affected corridor. Emergency personnel are on scene. Again, this is a hazardous airborne release associated with a freight incident near the Tillotson corridor." There was a click, a rewind squeal, then the same voice again, slightly different cadence. Same message, different take, then another. 3 versions. At the end, a man said, "Good. Hold that unless county approves full send." Another voice I recognized after a second. Younger Andrea Pike. "Keep freight in, not building. If this gets out, freight keeps residents from circling back." Somebody asked, "What if dispatch logs say odor complaint?" Andrea said, "Then logs say odor complaint. Public message says freight." That was it. I sat with the recorder in my hand and traffic moving past the strip mall and felt something much colder than fear. Fear is sharp. This was administrative. They had recorded a public emergency message blaming a freight incident that never happened. Not as a weird theory, as a working script, as an option. That was the first thing that matched the size of my own reaction. The next question was why. I found the answer in pieces. A retired county communications technician named Mark Elledge called me back because I left a voicemail saying I was looking into a January 2002 incident where a public message may have been drafted but not aired. I didn't mention Cedar Ridge in the message. When he called, the first thing he asked was, "Who gave you my name?" "Nobody. Public Pension Board minutes." He actually laughed at that. "Jesus. Okay. What exactly do you think you found?" We met at a diner in Anderson because that was halfway for him. He brought a manila envelope and the attitude of someone who had spent a long career around panic and now preferred everything slightly inconvenient rather than dramatic. "I don't have records," he said. "I have memory, and memory's a crooked witness. That's more than anyone else has given me." He looked at me for a while, then said, "There was talk that night about an external cover explanation." Cover explanation. That's what I called it, not what they called it. Why? Because once they realized where the exposures probably happened, nobody wanted residents re-entering the site. Nobody wanted press helicopters over a cheap apartment complex, and nobody wanted to answer why people had been staged below grade. Below grade. That phrase hit harder than basement would have. I asked what he meant by exposures. He stirred his coffee and said, "My recollection is carbon monoxide compounded by poor air circulation and maybe something off the restoration equipment." Don't quote me like that's a lab result. I'm telling you what operations chatter sounded like at 1:30 in the morning. Restoration from what? Burst pipe upstairs, boiler issues, frozen line, something in that family. So there was water damage. Probably. There were also people getting headaches and dropping in chairs, which tends to overtake plumbing details. He said responders initially thought they might be dealing with a gas issue in the building. Then a broader off-site source got floated because multiple residents were symptomatic, and there was confusion about where people had been gathered. Once they learned many had been held in the lower common room, while maintenance and management tried to keep hallways clear, the whole thing got politically ugly. "Why the freight story?" I asked. "Because freight sounds like bad luck. Building systems sound like negligence." He didn't know who killed the alert. He suspected county and property council together. By then, they already had buses moving and a motel set up. Public shelter in place would have created traffic, media, and state reporting. Quiet relocation contained it. Contained what? He took a drink and answered carefully. Liability, inspection attention, questions about occupancy, questions about why unofficial residents might not be on primary paperwork, questions about kids. That word again. "Did a child die?" I asked. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said, "There was concern afterward involving one non-lease minor." That phrase sounded so ugly I almost missed what it meant. I went home and spent half the night on obituary databases instead of sleeping. That's how I found Mara. Mara Ortega, age 10, died January 31st, 2002 at Ball Memorial. The obituary was 4 lines long, survived by her mother Ana Ortega and grandparents in Texas. No cause of death. No mention of Cedar Ridge. Services private. I must have read those 4 lines 20 times. There are things you can tell yourself up to a point. Maybe she had something unrelated. Maybe she was never in that room. Maybe guest on a sign-in sheet meant nothing. But once I had a name, an age, a date, and a hospital 4 days after the relocation, the shape of it stopped being theoretical. I ordered the death certificate. Indiana doesn't make that as easy as people think, but next of kin rules bend a little if you're stubborn and vague and willing to pay for the certified version. I eventually got an informational copy through a genealogy service that was technically pulling from state index data and not the certificate itself. Immediate cause, anoxic brain injury. Underlying, complications following toxic inhalation. Manner, accident. Place of injury. Residence. No address visible on the index extract. I sat there at my kitchen table with that screen open and understood why Andrea had chosen her words so carefully. Not on that property. If Mara died at the hospital 4 days later, they could say that and keep eye contact. I don't know what exactly I expected to feel then. Vindicated, maybe. Instead, I felt ashamed. Not morally, not yet. More personally than that. I had been digging because something had been done to me, to my family, to people in that building. But there was a dead 10-year-old at the center of it, and I had spent a week being excited every time a clue fit. That changed the direction of what I looked for next. I stopped trying to prove there had been a cover-up. I knew that already. I started trying to understand my mother. The last box from her storage unit had a manila folder inside a hanging file marked School. It didn't belong there. The tab on the folder said Medical/January 2nd in her handwriting. Inside was the hospital discharge sheet I should have looked for sooner. Patient, Daniel Keene, age 14. Assessment, carbon monoxide exposure, mild. Headache, nausea, transient confusion. Recommendation, rest. Follow up with PCP if concentration issues persist or symptoms recur. Transient confusion. There was also a page for Rachel. Lower level exposure, inhaler use, observation only. At the bottom of my discharge packet, someone had stapled a note card with my mother's writing. Ask school about missed days. No gym this week. Don't let Daniel drive himself crazy trying to remember. I actually laughed when I read that, and then immediately had to sit down because it landed too hard. She had written that 20 years before. I did exactly that. There was one more document in the folder. Not medical. A settlement release. Not a huge amount. Just enough that I understood how a single mother with 2 kids and a bad apartment might decide not to become difficult. It was from Harrow Property Group's insurer, in exchange for reimbursement, temporary lodging, and a relocation payment. The resident agreed not to make public statements or pursue claims arising from the January 27th maintenance-related occupancy interruption, except through confidential dispute procedures. My mother had signed it 10 days after the motel. There was a sticky note on the back in her handwriting again, not meant for anyone else. If I push, they ask who was there and why. If I sign, we leave. I knew immediately who she meant. Mara, or Mara's mother, or both. The girl on separate paperwork, the additional names to be provided quietly at the side table, the non-lease minor. My mother had not just been one resident among many. She had known enough about who was in that room and who should not have been documented that fighting publicly might have hurt people she was trying to protect. That doesn't excuse it. It made it human. I called Rachel and read the note aloud. She didn't speak for a while. Then she said, very softly, "Mom babysat for Anna sometimes." That pulled a whole old corner of my brain open. Not memories exactly. More like the pressure marks left where memories used to sit. A woman smoking on our outside stairs while thanking my mother in fast, embarrassed English. A girl with dark hair coloring at our kitchen table. Rachel and me told not to mention to management that anybody else stayed over, because it's none of their business. "Mara," I said, "I think so. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't remember until you said the note. Was she there that night?" "I don't know. I was 9. I closed my eyes. In the motel video, my younger self kept looking toward the back table. Not randomly. Checking. Because I knew her. Not well enough to say her name 20 years later, apparently, but well enough to keep looking for her after whatever happened in that basement room. Rachel said, "Daniel, maybe Mom thought she was protecting them." She was, and us. Yeah. That was the part that hurt. For about a week after that, I considered going public in some larger way. Local paper, state agency, somebody who could turn it into a real investigation. I had the cassette. I had the tape from the motel. I had the settlement release and the hospital discharge note, and a dead child whose obituary lined up too neatly with everyone's evasions. Then Claire called and said Sadie had told her I kept asking weird questions about whether she remembered things exactly, or if sometimes grown-ups told you what happened enough times that it pushed the real memory out. I hadn't realized I'd done that. Or maybe I had, and just didn't want to think about it. Claire said, "You need to leave this alone when she's around." I said, "I know." "No, Daniel, you need to actually leave it alone." That was the first time I heard the edge in her voice that meant custody wasn't an abstract threat. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just sounded like someone preparing to be practical if I made her. So I stopped, at least in the visible ways. I didn't go to the paper. I didn't post clips. I didn't send the audio anywhere that would turn it into content for strangers to argue over. Some part of that was fear for myself. Most of it, if I'm being honest, was that once I understood my mother's note, the story changed shape again. It was no longer just about a company hiding negligence. It was also about the way poor people get cornered into helping institutions clean up the truth, because the truth has collateral damage they can't afford. If Harrow got exposed, what happened to Ana Ortega in 2002? What questions got asked about where Mara slept? Who watched her? Whether her mother worked under someone else's name? Whether my mother was paid off or just tired and scared? People imagine truth as this clean moral event. A lot of the time, it's just a brighter light pointed at the wrong people first. That doesn't mean I think silence was noble. I don't. A 10-year-old girl died after being held in a basement room, while adults kept choosing manageable language over accurate language. Somebody recorded a public emergency message for a fake freight disaster because it was easier to blame a thing that happened nowhere than a thing that happened in their own building. People signed forms. People took payments. People used phrases like occupancy interruption and resident stability and non-lease minor until a real child turned into a paperwork risk. I'm one of the people who lived through it, and I still can't tell you exactly when the silence stopped being something done to us and became something we were helping hold in place. That's the part I didn't expect. I thought if I got enough records, there'd be a clean line between victims and liars. There wasn't. There was negligence, yes. There was institutional cowardice. There was definitely a rehearsed attempt to build an outside cover story, and maybe use it if they had to. But there were also mothers making fast decisions in motel conference rooms with school forms in their bags, and kids half sick beside them. There were residents who probably knew more than they ever said because saying it out loud would have exposed someone more fragile than themselves. About 3 months after I got fired, I drove back to the complex one last time. They had torn out the old leasing office carpet and painted everything a gray that was supposed to look clean and expensive. Building C looked smaller than it had when I was a kid. That bothered me more than I expected. I parked where I could see the back slope and just sat there. I had brought a printed still from the motel tape, the one with the back table barely in frame. If you don't know what you're looking at, it's nothing. Old VHS blur, a tired woman, a girl sitting beside her. My mother 3 rows up, not quite turning around. If you do know what you're looking at, it's worse. A little while later, a maintenance cart rolled by, and the driver glanced at me but didn't stop. Different man, different keys. Same place learning how to continue. I finally got out and walked the side path between C and D, where the lower entrance used to be. The door there now opened onto a locked storage alcove and a paneled wall. No basement on the posted plans, no lower common, no laundry. Just a blank wall finished neatly enough that most people would assume it had always been that way. I stood there longer than I should have, looking at a wall that denied a room I could now remember in pieces. The chairs, the vending machine hum, somebody saying to keep the kids together. That strange, heavy air that made everybody irritable before it made them afraid. I even remembered one dumb, tiny thing. I had wanted to go back upstairs because I'd left a cassette in my Walkman and didn't want the batteries to die. That's what memory gives you sometimes. Not revelation. Batteries. I still have the mini cassette with the emergency message on it. I digitized it and stored copies in 3 places because apparently I did inherit some of my mother's paperwork religion after all. I still have the motel tape too, though I watch it less now. For a while I thought I kept it as evidence. The truth is I kept it because it contains the only moving image I have of my mother in a moment when she was making a decision I judged before I understood. She looks exhausted. She looks furious in a contained way. She looks like a person doing bad math under pressure and picking the version that gets her children out by noon. When I watch it now, I don't focus on Andrea at the front anymore. I don't even focus on myself with the wristband. I watch my mother glance back toward that table. Not staring, just checking. Making sure the girl is still there. Making sure somebody has eyes on her. Making sure, maybe, that if this all gets flattened into forms and phrases by morning, one human being in that room is still behaving like what happened is happening to actual people. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the fake freight alert, Not the settlement. Not even the death record. A glance. Because that's what scares me now. How much of this country runs on practiced language and small glances. The official sentence says one thing. The room knows another. Everybody understands the difference. Nobody wants to be the person who turns the second thing into paperwork. If you had asked me a year ago what I found, I would have said an emergency broadcast recorded for a disaster that never happened. That's true. It's just not the worst part. The worst part is that the real disaster did happen, and for most of the people in charge, the urgent problem wasn't stopping it. It was deciding what to call it before anyone else did.